think in today's world, it is perfectly reasonable for but different parents to adhere to slightly different styles. So you don't need to be intimidated if your friends might be parenting a little bit differently. The three styles of parenting that I was exposed to in one of my early childhood classes was permissive, authoritative, and authoritarian.
Right.
And
I think authoritarian is probably what you grew up with to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, my parents were
your generation.
That's right.
With to a certain
Exactly.
Extent.
Exactly.
Sort of been left by the wayside to us.
To some extent, there are still people
Yes.
who might not be as versed in the emotional
Right.
side of their children's upbringing, and still, I mean, to
Do we want
me,
to explain what authoritarian?
it's you do as I say.
Children are
To be heard and to be seen and not heard.
Yes.
And children.
And why do you have to do it? Because I said so.
Exactly. And when you're a parent, you can, tell your kid what to do. It's basically what its name implies. It's authoritarian. It's authority. Parents are the authority, and the kids have to toe the line. In certain homes, that included some corporal punishment. It could be mild, but it could be some kind of consequences. It could be spankings. It could be just.
It could be you go to your room.
That's right. Or it could be that you are.
Or I'm going to take that toy away.
That's right. Exactly. Or for older kids, for teenagers, you are grounded for so many days or whatever.
I think the salient point though is that it is a punishment, and it's not necessarily reflective of what the child did or didn't do. It's not an organic consequence of what the child did.
You broke the rules.
You're right.
And so there's a punishment for it. Permissive is on the other side of the pendulum, where there are few rules. And
children get to make a lot of their own choices.
Exactly.
If not all.
Yeah. And we've worked with some families and parents who expect their children to make decisions that we don't think they are equipped to make. I'm going to let my child decide
which school they want to go to,
elementary school they go to, and again, not setting limits and boundaries,
and maybe even feeling like limits and boundaries are bad and damaging.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember you telling a story about a family who said we don't use the N-word.
Yeah, the N-word. No. Exactly.
That the idea that might be damaging to a child's self-esteem.
Yeah. I think that the authoritarian parent, or the idea of the authoritarian parent was present in the 1940s and before. I think the permissive parent was basically in the 60s and maybe 70s, and it was a reaction to more authoritarian parenting.
I'm going to allow my child the freedom
exactly
to make their own choices.
Authoritative is in the middle. Is kind of in the middle. I mean, their boundaries, their rules, but there's respect for the child. There's discussion. We talk a lot about natural consequences, and those natural consequences are the result of a child not abiding by certain rules in the household, but as a result,
but the consequence is connected to the transgression.
Exactly.
So you're not playing appropriately with that toy. I'm going to take that toy away, rather than we're not going to go to Disneyland tomorrow, because it's too far removed.
Exactly. I also think, as opposed to authoritarian, there is some allowances for discussion for a child. What?
Negotiation.
That's right.
Or
Exactly.
at least answering the why.
Yeah.
Why is that the rule? Why can I not do this?
Right. Allowing this negotiation is a really good opportunity to help your child problem solve. So you want to stay up an extra half hour.
Make your case.
That's right. Make your case. And if the case is made, then the result is, if tomorrow you can't get up and get yourself ready for school or whatever, then that will not be a place to negotiate anymore. So, if in fact it seemed reasonable, you said you thought you were able to do that, and we will listen. And I think it sets a relationship more of equality, but the parent is still the parent.
The parent is still the parent, but the parent isn't just enforcing rules that make no sense.
That's right, arbitrary rules. Yes, exactly.
There's a reason. You know, it's my job to keep you safe.
That's right, exactly.
Or it's my job to help you grow up to be a good, kind person. Whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I have heard numerous times from your daughter, who's 5, who says, I'm going to jump from here, and I will be safe. Which is a nice idea, but if in fact you don't feel it's safe,
although I might engage with a conversation with her about it, rather than just say, no, you may not do that.
Right.
What happens if you do fall down?
Right.
Yeah, and
she doesn't like to see blood.
She doesn't like that at all.
Exactly.
She usually changes her mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to negotiate with kids and to problem solve, to help them.
Yeah, I think so. But I think it's also okay for ultimately you to be the one who makes the decision.
Absolutely.
And if you negotiate and they still are like, no, I'm going to jump off from that bridge, it's okay for you to say, no, you're not.
Yeah, exactly. I also think there's a point at which a parent can say, you know what, I'm tired of having this conversation, because kids can be, very persistent.
And they can ask why when they already know the answer.
That's right, exactly. And
it's fine to say, we've already discussed this lots of times.
Exactly, and I don't want to hear it anymore. So that to me. The fourth kind of parenting that we've heard lately, that I don't know as much about, that you might give us a little bit of a synopsis, is gentle parenting.
But gentle parenting, I think, is interesting because there is what it proclaims to be, and then there's what people who practice it interpret it as being, and I think that they're often very, very different. I think gentle parenting is on its face an authoritative type of parenting.
Right.
It's really about valuing and reinforcing your child's feelings and emotions, helping them grow to be a socially intelligent human being, and focusing more on the feelings behind what they have done rather than the behavior. But it's not about not setting boundaries at all. I mean, in fact, I think that it's very clear that there need to be boundaries, and that that's helpful for children. I think that in practice, a lot of parents who claim to be employing gentle parenting are really
permissive,
just being permissive.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. We've had parents whose children struggle with separating, saying goodbye when they're dropped off. Kids who've, made a reasonable transition into school, but that it's like ripping a Band-Aid off, and it's really painful for them, and it then becomes so painful for the parent that they spend 20 minutes trying to negotiate with the child and explain to the child, that they will be back and the child will be fine. And after a while, it just
it draws out the pain.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Or they'll try and do something else. They'll try and sneak out.
Yeah. Yeah.
When the child is engaged in having fun, they'll try and sneak away, which ultimately means they don't have to see the child be unhappy, but it doesn't mean the child's not going to be unhappy. When they discover that mommy or daddy is gone, they're going to be unhappy. And then, you worry that also interferes with feelings of trust and security.
Yeah. And the other thing that I struggle with is parents bribing their kids. I'm not opposed to rewards for certain things, and I have suggested to parents who are potty training their kids.
Yeah, rewards charts.
That's right. Little like that. Reward seems appropriate. But to say, you know what, if I go, I can go to the store and I can bring you back the, best treat that you like. It's, you can do it occasionally, but I don't think it's a habit that you want to get into.
Unless you want to be buying 10 toys a day.
Yeah, exactly. One of the parenting questions that we have received from our parents with children in our school, is, can you help me a little bit? My child is melting down 6 times a day, which is a difficult phase to go through. And I think, like many other responses that we might give to parents, and it's helpful that we know that particular child so that we can answer, I think this is probably a phase that they're going through. It could be, what we call the terrible twos, which very often is more likely 2.5, or just a different period, or there's something going on in their life. It could be
this is a child who has some sensory sensitivities.
That's right, exactly.
They're feeling flooded.
Right.
They're having trouble regulating.
Right.
We might recommend some occupational therapy.
Exactly.
Or some other tools.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it needs to be explored so that they can figure out what the impetus is. And again, it also depends on the age of the child. If you're dealing with a 2-year-old, there's not a lot of intervention that can...
You kind of have to let it run its course.
Yep.
You want to make sure, of course, that the child is safe, that they're not going to hurt themselves or anybody else. If they're the kind of child who feels better if you lay next to them or put your arm around them, then you do that.
Right.
If not, you lay or sit a few feet away and just wait for it to be over.
Yeah.
I sometimes to crawl up into your lap.
I sometimes sat on the couch, and I'd say, when you're ready, bring your blankie and come and sit with me. Before that, it was very likely that I would be pushed away, and any suggestion that I made.
Yeah, well, I think that's an important thing to touch on, that when they're in the throes of a tantrum, it's not the appropriate time to be discussing what happened before, why they got so upset. They're not hearing anything that you have to say.
They are not. And the interesting thing is, with very young kids, with 2-year-olds, maybe young 3-year-olds, is sometimes they forget after a few minutes what they're even tantruming about.
And it becomes about something different.
Yeah, or, and the tantrum just kind of has a life of its own, and it just really needs the opportunity to be spent.
And sometimes it doesn't even come from a particular incident. Sometimes kids fall apart
they're tired, they're hungry. Exactly.
They're coming down with something. They don't know.
Exactly.
Why it's happening.
Exactly.
So asking them, why are you doing this, isn't going to be very valuable.
And if by chance you have if a child has a grandparent who's a bit old-fashioned and is giving you advice as to just send them to their room or something else. Exactly. You have our permission to kind of ignore it. Might be different if your child is much older, and then you can say, you know what, I've heard this for a very long time, and it's really giving me a headache. So why don't you go finish being upset in your room or somewhere that the rest of the family doesn't hear it, and then we can talk about it and see if we can find a solution to it. But again, that's not a 2-year-old. That's more likely a 5-year-old or older. And, a tantrum that comes from you're not going to the store this minute and buying them a new toy is a little bit different than a tantrum because their brother took away a toy that they wanted to play with or something like that. So it's one more opportunity to learn who your child is, and as best as you can to try and help them learn to self-soothe. We have been committed since, or we were committed from the time we opened till when we closed, to accept children with a variety of issues who are neurodivergent, as long as we felt that they were appropriate to our environment, and they could be successful, and we could be helpful. And over the years, we've had kids who have been diagnosed on the autistic spectrum, almost always, with the exception maybe of 1 or 2, they were diagnosed as high functioning.
Moderate to high functioning.
Moderate to high functioning. They didn't present as what years and years ago my perception of what autism meant. And unless they were severely hampered by sensory issues, which I think is pretty prevalent in spectrum kids.
Yeah, and if they were, I don't think we would have been the appropriate place.
Exactly.
Because we were quite active and noisy.
That's right. That's exactly right. It was a very sensory full kind of program. So before accepting children with issues, we would ask parents to bring them in and see how they did and see what we think. And so, one of the things that we had to assess was, one, were they appropriate for our setting, and did they need somebody with them? We would prefer not to have a therapeutic companion or a shadow with them because, and I think we said this at one of the earlier videos, that we wanted that child to be a part of the class. And
so if we did have somebody with them, we wanted somebody who was able to
integrate them. Exactly.
Becoming a part of the class.
Exactly. Sometimes there were kids, not necessarily kids who were on the spectrum, but for one reason or another, who had some challenges that the other kids were aware of. And there were times where...
Either because they had somebody with them, or more likely just because of their behavior.
That's right. And we were pretty honest with the other kids in terms of explaining that he or she needs a little extra time, maybe to come over to circle time, or whatever it was.
Yeah, and even talking about how different brains work differently.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, and we didn't, I know that there are some parents who kind of want to not mention this kind of thing and sweep it under the rug, but
it's not something that's shameful, and
it isn't. That's
we
right.
Should act as though it's shameful.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a fact.
That's right.
Different
that
people
we're
are different.
all different, and that's something we talk about, and that's something we believe, and we want our kids to know that. And some people are good at these things, and some people are good at those things, and some people have difficulty in certain situations. I think it's good for everybody. Again, and one thing I do want to say is, for the most part, when a child who's been diagnosed as neurodivergent has come to us, for the most part, parents have a discussion generally with me, because I was doing the tours, and might have been the first person that they interacted with. Sometimes they'll come to a tour first, and that's absolutely fine. But there have been a couple occasions where the parents felt like it would be in the child's best interest not to share the information on the child's difficulties. And we didn't feel that was helpful to anybody. And again, as you said, we don't think that this is anything to be shameful for,
And I think I also said in a previous video, if the concern is that your child won't be accepted if you share certain information, or they'll be stigmatized in some way, I think maybe you want to evaluate whether that's even a program you want to be a part of.
Yeah.
The kind of school that wouldn't accept your child, is that the kind of place that they would thrive in?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.